Producers just distribute to a much smaller number of retailers. Distribution via wholesalers and retailers. This type of distribution channel involves at least two intermediaries, wholesalers and retailers. This is sometimes called traditional distribution. Wholesalers are businesses that purchase in considerable bulk from producers and then sell smaller batches to many different retail businesses. For instance, independently owned convenience grocery stores and pet shops usually buy their stock from wholesalers. Using wholesalers is an effective way for manufacturers to get products stocked in small retail businesses without having the transport costs involved in making small deliveries to each of them. What factors will influence which method of distribution is chosen? Decisions are influenced by the cost of distribution, the nature of the market, and the extent to which the producer wishes to control how products are marketed. As already mentioned, an advantage to producers of using wholesalers and larger retailers is that far fewer deliveries need to be made than would be needed if the delivery were straight to the consumer. This reduces the cost of distribution. On the other hand, each intermediary involved in the chain of distribution seeks to make a profit. The purchase price that retailers and wholesalers pay is inevitably less than the price that producers might charge if they were selling direct to the consumer. If customers are prepared to come to a factory shop or some other outlet controlled by the producer, then direct selling might look attractive. A classic example of this is the pick-your-own fruit farm. High-volume mass-market products have to be sold often to a very large number of customers. There's no such thing as a local toothpaste manufacturer, for instance. The market for this sort of goods is national or possibly international. For that reason, it usually makes sense to distribute mass-market products through retailers. On the other hand, if a market has a smaller number of customers, direct distribution becomes more feasible. Producers of industrial goods like aeroplanes or industrial robots may seriously consider direct distribution because they have a small number of customers. Getting these products to the consumer is in some ways far less complex than delivering consumer goods to millions of people. Whenever a producer uses an intermediary to sell its products, it's handing a degree of control over promotion and price to the intermediary. This may be to the advantage of the producer. Being stocked in an established national retail chain can mean that the product is well promoted. On the other hand, the way that an intermediary, like a retailer, markets a product may not suit the producer. For some producers, only direct distribution provides them with the control over marketing that they seek. So, to sum up, distribution channels are the means by which businesses get products to their consumers. There are three main types of distribution channel: direct, via retailers, via wholesalers and retailers. Decisions made about how a product is distributed are influenced by the cost of distribution, the nature of the market, and the extent to which the producer wishes to control marketing. You might like to try this activity. Suggest, with reasons, the best way to distribute the.
Okay, so that kind of sums up a little bit of what was in your chapter. I've got one more I'm going to show you part of, and then one that shows you it actually in action with Starbucks. So give me a second here. Let me be sure I haven't not closed it and it's still going like the other one.
When determining through which channels to place or sell a product or a service, we talk about using distribution strategy. However, before we start, let us just list the learning goals for this video. The goal is to understand what distribution strategy is, why we need to know about it, and how we could go about using it. We will do this through establishing a general understanding of the actual purpose of distribution strategy and look at what might impact the success of our distribution channel choice. We will also provide an overview of some additional available tools and theories that we as marketers can use when determining the channel choice of a product or a service. So let's start. What is the purpose of distribution strategy? And what is the connection to the rest of the marketing mix? When you are asked to design the marketing mix, you need to make decisions on 4 or 7 core elements, also known as the 4 or the 7 Ps. First of all, any issues concerning the product. This would include packaging and all other elements in connection with the product. Secondly, a decision on price. Thirdly, you will need to decide on the place, which is what this video will address. We will also need to make a plan of which promotional activities we will carry out in order to tell our customers about our product and encourage them to buy. If we're dealing with an offering that is better described as a service, or perhaps a product that includes large elements of service, we might also want to look at the additional 3 Ps. The people that are involved in delivering the service, the process that our customers will go through in order to receive our service, and the physical evidence, any visible or tangible elements that the customer will see, hear, or in other ways experience when receiving the service. None of the 4 or the 7 Ps should be decided on in isolation. However, place is the P which we will focus on in this video. So, why is it important to make sure we choose the right distribution channels? Let us use an example. This business produces French cakes and desserts. In these modern production facilities, well-educated confectioners develop recipes and create delicious cakes and desserts ready to be sold and distributed to cake-loving customers. What will impact the success of the chosen distribution channels? And subsequently, which considerations are relevant when making their choice of distribution setup? Let us imagine that they had the idea of selling their cakes and desserts in rural areas through roadside self-service booths where customers were expected to show up and purchase the products without any assistance. In this case, we could argue that they should first of all have considered some market factors. Firstly, what is the location and concentration of their customers? Is it likely that they will be able to sell to a suitable amount of customers with this kind of setup? Secondly, do their customers expect to buy these types of cakes and desserts at roadside booths? If not, it could be a challenge to convince them of the value in doing so. Thirdly, we would advise them to consider whether the customers would be able to get the information and service expected when using this type of setup. Our recommendation for French Cakes Corporation would, amongst other factors, depend on their answers to these questions about market factors. Let us imagine another scenario where French Cakes are considering establishing a chain of French Cakes cafes, through which they will sell their cakes and desserts. In addition to the market factors which we have already discussed, we as marketers would also advise them to consider some factors about themselves. Firstly, do they have the required resources to undertake such an investment, regarding both time, money, and people? Secondly, what level of control do they desire from their distribution channel? Owning the distribution channel gives ultimate control, but it comes at a price. Thirdly, we might discuss with them whether their product range is wide enough to meet customers' needs. So, our recommendations for this company would, amongst other factors, also depend on their answers to these questions about themselves. We could also imagine that the company were keen on creating an online web shop where their customers could order their cakes and desserts and get them delivered directly to their homes. In addition to the market and producer factors which we have already discussed, we would also advise them to consider some factors about the actual products. Firstly, does the perishability, the fairly short shelf life of a cake or dessert, suit this type of distribution? Would they be able to deliver the product while it's still edible? Would there be ways of overcoming this obstacle? Secondly, are cakes and desserts suitable for handling in this way? And thirdly, with other types of products, complexity could be an issue. So our recommendation for this company would, in addition to the factors already discussed, also depend on the answers to the questions about the actual products. We might also imagine that the company is keen on distributing their products through supermarkets in order to reach a large number of people from their target group in this way. In addition to the previously discussed factors, we would also ask them to consider some facts about their competitors. Firstly, which channels are their competitors using? And secondly, is it possible to achieve differentiation through choice of channel? Let us imagine that in one particular supermarket chain, consumers are not exposed to the competitors' cakes or desserts. Distributing the products through this chain would therefore enable them to differentiate from the competition and ultimately have a better chance of selling their products to the end consumers. So our recommendation for French Cakes Corporation would, in addition to the other already mentioned factors, also depend on the answers to these questions about the competitors. So, when advising the company on their choice of distribution channels, we would look at some market factors, some factors about the French Cakes Corporation itself, factors about the products, and some factors in connection with the competitive situation. And finally, we would look at the rest of the marketing mix to ensure that the choice of place corresponds with how French Cakes Corporation wishes to be positioned in the minds of the customers. We have now established the purpose of distribution strategy, what it is and why we need to know about it, and we have established that there are many factors which we need to look at before we can decide on the best place to distribute our product or service. So let's move on. In addition to the factors we have just discussed, we as marketers have some additional tools and theories we can use to guide us when determining which distribution channels to use. These will not be described in detail in this video, but let us just introduce an overview of some of the tools and theories we might want to use. We would determine whether we're dealing with consumer, B2B, and/or services distribution channels. Distribution intensity should be looked at. To what extent and in which context do we want our product or service to be available to the end consumers? Thirdly, we would consider whether to use independent intermediaries, setting up a franchise operation, or perhaps go for channel ownership. We should also look at the physical distribution system, which would include decisions on transportation of goods, inventory issues, and order processing procedures. If we're dealing with retail, we could also look at the process of retail differentiation. Finally, we should also look at how we could manage the relationships with our chosen distribution channels, so that it remains prosperous for both us and for the different parties within the channel. We have now established an understanding of the purpose of distribution strategy, the different factors that impacts our choice, and lastly we have presented an overview of some additional tools and theories available to us when determining a suitable place to distribute our product or service. To learn more about distribution strategy and how to use the different tools and theories introduced in this video, I recommend that you read Chapter 6.
Okay, so as I've told y'all throughout the semester, whether you're studying marketing in business or studying marketing in healthcare, or wherever it happens to be, the same principles are always there. So if you look at this, they gave you examples of a particular company, the French Cake Company, and all the different steps that it goes through. But as you read the chapter in the book, it gives you the same type of information. Like it tells you, I think one of the ones uses McDonald's as an example, and it tells you, you know, how McDonald's went through the steps, and then it goes back and says, you know, this is how the health organization would go through the steps. So it's everything you learn is applicable, not just to healthcare, but beyond that. It's because the principles are the same, no matter what it is. All right, if we have time for the other one, the other video, I'll show it later, but I'd like to get into just discussing the chapter. Do I have any questions before we get started? Anybody? Okay, I guess everybody's either not awake or hanging in there good, hanging in there tough. All right, so I'm gonna share with you now the PowerPoint that was in your on the content, and then we'll and then I'll add to it. We'll discuss some of the points in there. All right. Okay, like the book, or like the video we just saw, talked about the channel of distribution. And basically, that's a really simple matter. The channel of distribution is just how it gets from the manufacturer to the ultimate consumer. And, you know, that can be in healthcare, it can be, you know, in hamburgers, it can be whatever it happens to be. But it's basically the way it takes to get from who makes it to who uses it. So, as it talked about in one of the videos you just saw, the place element in the marketing mix is the distribution. So when if y'all all remember the song from the little ditty that I played at the beginning of the semester, price, product, place, promotion. Well, this section talks all about the place. How are we going to get it there? How is your consumer going to get the product? Things have changed a lot in the last few years, and sometimes instead of it being like where you've done, you know, what was done 20, 30, 40 years ago, where you go to a doctor, if you're sick, you have to make an appointment, go to the doctor. Now you have alternatives. You know, your place can be your iPad. You know, it can be one of the apps that has a doctor on call, or it can be an online coach that helps you control your chronic pain. They're used a lot of times to help people who are living with diabetes control what they eat and live a healthier lifestyle. You have online coaches through these apps. And even so much as now, iPhone has things like otoscopes and blood pressure monitors, all kinds of things that can be hooked to your iPhone, and you can actually give the medical provider information that has been derived using the iPhone and these different kinds of equipment. And every day they're coming up with new things for that. And then in addition, in the traditional consumer product, the product is how and where the product or service is assessed by the consumer is always considered the path of the channel of distribution. In healthcare, it's the path that the patient takes as he or she accesses the appropriate level of care. So they're saying now, you know, that a lot of times research has shown that people, before they call the doctor and make an appointment, they go to the internet and they put their symptoms in and they figure out what it might be, or they go to one of these apps where you can put your symptoms in, and it gives you some possibilities, and then you decide whether or not you're going to go to a doctor. So people are more active now, especially in your age group, in the way that they assess their health care. So the length of the channel distribution really refers to how many intermediaries it has to go through. So if you're looking at, let's say you get up in the morning and you have a sore throat, and so you think, well, you know, what could it be? And you know, some people will search the internet. Maybe you'll go to an online app of some sort, or maybe even possibly from the online app. There was one app that the book talks about that you go through their database and they tell you the possibilities, and then you can actually chat with a doctor, and then maybe actually have a visit with a doctor, be told that you need to visit a doctor or emergency room, whatever else it happens to be. So you hit a lot of intermediaries before you get to the ultimate service that you might need. In some cases, it might stop with just the first intermediary. But because of high costs in healthcare and the deductibles, people are more health conscious. They're looking at different ways and what the costs are before they just immediately jump to going to see a doctor. So, excuse me. So when you look at the most direct channel, that's your primary care physician and the patient. That's when you go directly from feeling bad, directly to their primary care physician. And then there's also other direct channels, like you can go to a retail clinic that has, for instance, CVS now has clinics. I've even seen them in grocery stores. Kroger's has them. And there's also direct channels that have apps that have you speak directly to a doctor. So direct channels are actually just the producer directly to the consumer. Now, the web is changing, particularly for rural areas and hard to reach places, because used to rural areas had community hospitals. They have, maybe doctors that did the whole area. Like you look back in the really old days, like in the time of Little House on the Prairie and Gunsmoke and some of those where they had a doctor that actually had a small office. Most oftentimes they went out to the patient. They had house calls, but it was in a rural area, it was one person taking care of a whole big area. But the web has changed that a lot, because now you can get a lot of that service done through the web. So it's making a huge difference. There was your book was talking about how many community hospitals had closed in recent years because they just can't support themselves anymore. There's too many other ways people can get service. They're not willing to pay the extra money. It's hard to get people to work in those community hospitals because typically your pay isn't as much. It's very, very different. And people typically that have that kind of education don't want to go live in the rural areas particularly. So they're leaning more towards medicine through the web, medicine through apps. A lot of big clinics are opening up satellite offices that are specialized, where people don't have to go as far to get things. But these community hospitals that generally have everything are just starting to disappear in the American landscape. Oftentimes nowadays, the web channels are used also for second opinions. So used to, you'd have to go to one doctor, then you take all your paperwork and you go to another doctor. Now they have services with you get second opinions from a variety of experts, and it's much less expensive and much less time consuming than to go and visit another doctor and have them look at what the first doctor's done, decide whether or not they would do it differently or if that's the right way to proceed. Then as you look at the functions in the channel, just a short definition, the place is actually the major function is it's the place, the intermediary that places value by making something more accessible. But maybe the clinic has longer hours, or maybe you've got Zoom Care, which is an app, or maybe you've got chat with an in-person doctor if needed. Oftentimes now they're even using drones to deliver medication to places that are harder to get to. So the place is your main intermediary challenge right now. It's the place where what kind of value can you add that will entice customers to come your way? And the time when it comes to intermediaries is how long can you store products until consumer purchases? The time actually, if you think about it in terms of synchronous and asynchronous, like what you have classes, like this one is a synchronous class hybrid, and then you also have asynchronous classes if you're in my 457 or 417 that never meet. Everything is done via the web, via telephone, via Zoom, whatever you need to meet with your professor, but you don't ever meet together as a class. Well, when you think of time for intermediaries like that, it's kind of the same thing. For instance, Target sells aspirin and, you know, everything else you might need, but they actually have the purpose of storing it until you actually need it when you go to buy it. You know, so that's more of a asynchronous thing, you know. Whereas with synchronous, you would go to the doctor, and it would happen right there, the two of y'all together. And time can also be used for, or intermediate interaction online can be used for post-op. Used to, you know, a couple of days or a week or so after you had surgery, you know, you'd have to go back in for post-op, but there really wasn't any reason the doctor would look at you and say, oh, you look fine, you know. And so you've spent, you know, several hours and time and, you know, and money to go see a doctor person to person, when now a lot of that's now being done via the web. So the web and this type of medicine is changing the landscape completely. Then the possession would be, sometimes people provide, intermediaries will provide you credit. The amount that hospitals now, you know, are having more difficulty because the deductibles are higher. So they're, a lot of times they're not always being paid, you know, so they're looking for ways to limit the liability of the patients. So there are companies now that will give out no interest loans to patients for their deductibles that are part of some of these medical settings. There's also places that can, you can get loans that have a very, very low interest rate. It's something that you need to have done, but you can't afford the deductible, because deductibles are sometimes very high now with the medical care that's out there, or the insurance that's out there. And then you have the form, which is changes the product to suit the patient or the client. And this could be like a prosthetic that needs to be fitted for a child, or something that has to be fitted to that particular client. So you're changing the form of the delivery. It's kind of the same thing as when you go to a suit place and you buy a suit, but it, you know, it doesn't have the hem in it yet, or it's too big in the waist, or it's too little in the waist, or whatever it happens to be, and you have a tailor that comes in and fixes it. So you've changed the form of the product once it goes to the final consumer. And this is just some, just a table showing, it comes from your book, and it's just a table showing synchronous versus asynchronous. Y'all can check that out in your book. And then the book goes on to talk about functional shifting, which is actually just the movement of different functions between the producer of a product and the service and intermediaries that before it gets to the consumer ultimately. So an example would be if you eliminated credit, let's say I'm thinking what's a good example. Maybe a company decides to quit offering credit as part of their services. So if the intermediary quits offering credit, then it's going to fall either on the producer or the consumer. So, you know, who is going to offer the credit if there's nobody in between? And that's functional shifting, meaning that the functions, one of the functions in the route, in the channel, has been shifted from one entity to another. So if there's no credit at the level where for the consumer, then the consumer is either going to have to figure out a way to pay for it, or the producer of the product is going to have to offer credit. So that's one example of functional shifting, where one of the functions taken on by the entity moves to a different entity in the channel. Okay, a lot of things have changed because of costs and because companies are constantly looking for ways to save money in healthcare, because healthcare is very expensive when companies provide it. The group insurance that you get, whether you're working for Cal State or whether you're working for whoever you, one of the big hospitals, whoever it happens to be, is very expensive for the employer. So they're constantly looking for ways to change that. And some of them have done things like they have clinics on property. My dentist actually goes 3 days a week to one of the big, I think it's one of the big makeup companies, Mary Kay or one of those, where they actually have a dentist's office on property because they found it was cheaper to pay a dentist a salary and to have them there to do, your normal work that you do on dentistry. Not, I don't think they do anything like root canals or anything like that, but the normal general work that you do on dentistry, you can get done right on property where you're working at. So they have shifted from having the employee have to go off property to a dentist and pay more than if they just have one there for them. And many companies now have clinics on property. That your large manufacturing companies, many of them have clinics on property. They're doing a lot of things to save costs that they may not have done 10 years, 15 years ago. Another thing that functionality switch is that up until about 2009, pharmacists did not give shots. You went to a pharmacist to pick up medicine, sometimes pharmacists had to, mix the compounds, but they never actually gave you shots or did anything along those lines. And in today's world, you can get all your shots, most of your shots at the local pharmacy. You just make an appointment, you can get your shingles shots, you can get flu shots, you can get all the kind of shots that you used to have to go to a doctor for, thereby shifting some of the load off of doctors, but also costing less because you're not paying for a doctor's time or a doctor's visit. You're not having the time involved in having to go and wait in the doctor's office when you can just go right up to one of the drugstores and get your shots. So that's also part of the shifting landscape and the functional shifting. Okay, the book talks a lot about whether intermediaries are necessary. And you need to have cooperation between physicians and hospitals. You need to have, there's a number of things you need to have, but intermediaries oftentimes will lessen the cost. They will make assist in convenience. There's a lot of things that they really are a necessary part of the landscape. All right, then as we talk about the intensity of distribution, this is actually how much effort will the consumer look for go into in looking for a product. And there's a lot of examples of this, but when it's intensive, it's like there's plenty of it everywhere. If you're, how many times, I wonder, has anyone been standing at the checkout counter at Target and all of a sudden remember that you wanted some gum? You're not going to get out of that line and go hunt for the exact brand of gum that you want, because probably right there, sitting beside the little moving belt, is going to be 4 or 5 choices of gum, and you can, just choose one of those because you don't really put a lot of thought into purchasing gum. The same thing goes maybe for aspirin. Maybe they'll have their brand of aspirin, and maybe a small one of Advil or something like that. You probably are not going to get in line and go all the way back to the section that has aspirin. You're just going to grab whatever's close by. Excuse me just a second. So there's not a lot of effort that's put into choosing that kind of product. It's just they're available and you take what's available. But then when you start looking at the selective process, most of the consumers will expend more effort looking for something that falls into that area. And that could be like a computer or specialty clinics. If you're looking at healthcare, you're not just going to walk into Best Buy and say, okay, that one looks good, I'll choose that computer. Most people are probably going to first look on the web, and they're going to look and see if you know, which brand they want. You know, maybe they want an HP, or maybe they want to go with an Apple product, a Mac, but they're going to do a little research. Most people are not going to go and drop, you know, $1,500 or so without at least looking ahead of time to see what they want on it. So that's more of a selective process. Same thing with especially clinic. If you're going to have a facelift, you're not going to probably go online and look for the cheapest alternative. You're going to want to look for one that has good reviews, you know, one that's been around a while. You know, you're going to be more selective. You're going to do a little research before you do that, before you make those choices. So that's when it falls into the selective expenditure, or selective amount of effort. And then you have the exclusive amount of effort. And this is when you, maybe a particular healthcare company offers a particular service that is maybe the best in the nation. An example of that would be the Menninger Clinic in Houston, that's known all over the world for their mental health success. So, you know, that you make more of a choice. An example in the traditional world would be Tiffany's Jewelry. Tiffany's Jewelry only has exclusive brands. They have some of, you know, they have the Rolex, and they have, you know, what's known as the quote Tiffany diamond, only the best in the world. So they're only offered there. So that's when you're looking for something really in particular, and you expend a whole lot of effort in that before you make the decision for that particular service that you're looking for. Okay. Let's see. When you're looking at intensive distribution, you might, when you're looking at health facilities, you might, one company, like I can think of one in particular in Texas. It's called Scott and White Clinic. They're based out of Temple, Texas, small town. They were recently bought out by Baylor Medicine. But when they were, and I'm sure there's still multiple clinics, but when they were Scott and White, they were going in and putting satellite facilities at all the little towns in Texas. And Texas is very different from California in that the towns don't bump into each other one right after the other. They are, you might have 20 miles between them and a lot of open spaces. You might even have, you know, 30, 40 miles with nothing between the city where the main hospital is and where the little small clinic is at. So those little satellite facilities would take care of minor things like, you know, checkups and things that you didn't need a major hospital for. And a lot of times these facilities have extended hours. And you might even have one in the same city as the major hospital, but they provide different types of services, extended hours, maybe Saturday hours, whatever it happens to be. But it's a large number of outlets, you know, so that's an intensive distribution, you know, where you can you have a choice and they're just out there, and you can kind of just go, well, you wake up and, you know, you got a sore throat again. But you don't want to use the internet, you want to go see somebody in person. So you just run to the closest, you know, satellite, and typically they can take care of it. Then, so they talk about the same thing with exclusive distribution, where it's a highly restricted number of specialty places. And then you have the hybrid. Now, hybrid is intensive and exclusive. So it's more than one location, but they work with, they're very particular about the retailers that they work with. For instance, hospitals may have a network like such as a cancer care clinic, and maybe that's all they do, but they're part of the main system. But it's very, they're very selective in who gets, they have to do things a certain way, they have to be trained a certain way, they have to hold up to the same standards as the main hospital. But they're very specialized, and maybe they're a heart center, or maybe they're a cancer center, or whatever it happens to be. So that's what they consider a hybrid. They're available, but they're also exclusive. Okay, any questions so far? Are we doing all right? Everybody doing okay? No questions? I don't hear anybody talking, so I guess we're okay. All right. Your vertical marketing systems are when your intermediaries, remember the intermediaries are the ones that fall between the producer and the consumer. And this is when they're integrated and they perform at the most efficient place within the channel. For instance, transaction cost savings focus on economies in the transfer and use of information across different care points, like the continuity of care. So you save money by having one person that or one group that integrates so well that your patient or your client or whoever it happens to be travels through the system fairly easily. And it saves money than having to go. Years ago, what would happen before we had these integrated systems is you'd go to one place for lab tests, you go to another place for x-rays, you go to something. There's all these different places that you would go to. And a lot of times people would end up having the same test run 2 or 3 times. Whereas with these integrated systems, then everything just is done once and everybody has access to that information. So you save a lot of time and money by having these systems where the consumer or patient passes through the system, all operating under one particular entity. Now it goes on to talk about market imperfections, which these can be regulatory constraints that keep you from doing what you want to do or keep you from doing what you need to do. There's a lot of regulations with healthcare, as we've talked about before. And so there's some things that you just can't do because you're regulated not to do it. There's also the market power of either the buyer or the seller. What are they able to or willing to provide or pay for? So it's not a perfect system. You can't just say, okay, we're going to start you here and you're going to get all these tests done and you're going to go straight through the system and ultimately end up where you need to be, because there's hiccups along the way. And these are imperfections in every system. Okay, vertical forward integration is when operations are acquired closer to the final buyer. So an example of this would be the primary care centers that are sort of like satellites from the main hospital. So that's why they're called vertical forward, because they're closer to the consumer. The consumer or the patient goes there first, and maybe it gets taken care of there. And then if that doesn't work, then they go on to the hospital. There's also vertical backward systems. And this is when they're talking about backward because they're not as close to the consumer. This would be when you have a large group of physicians who decide they're going to make their own hospital, create their own hospital. So they have somewhere to send their patients when they need to go to a hospital rather than using the facilities that are already there. And that's called vertical backward because they're getting further away from the actual consumer. They see the consumer, and then if the consumer needs more assistance, then they go to the hospital that has been created or developed by this group of medical practitioners. So vertical backwards is when you're further away from the consumer, like you're building the hospital and originally you were the primary care. Vertical forward is when you're the hospital building in primary care, because that's closer to consumers. Does that make sense? Anybody? All right, I can't see y'all, and so I can't tell. I'm not going to pick on any names. I can think of one name that always asks me questions, but I'm going to leave them alone today. So if I don't have any questions, I guess we're okay. Okay. We're going to buzz on by this because it's all pretty much the same information I just gave you. Now, when we're looking at, give me 1 second here to catch up on my other computer. And somehow my computer's going crazy. Okay. I can't tell y'all enough how healthcare is evolving. The channels are evolving. You know, disintermediation, and that's kind of a hard word, but that's when you eliminate the middleman. And remember we talked about in the before the holidays, the Internet of Things, which has everything you can find out on the internet, and that gives the patient greater participation. I don't know if y'all remember the video I showed y'all, but it showed how all these different kinds of services can be monitored from your house with using the internet. So that's when you're kind of eliminating the middleman. You're going directly from the provider to the consumer. Now, they have something called re-intermediation, which is specialized intermediaries who link buyers and sellers. This is where you can go and they can tell you, where you can go to get this, whatever you're looking for, whether you're looking for a particular service, a particular medical care, a particular doctor, whatever it happens to be, apps like ZocDoc can help you get there. And then you have the hybrid, which is 2 or more channels. You can have where one particular service offers you several things. They offer you face-to-face, they offer you telemedicine, and they offer you apps. And maybe you start with the app, and then you need a little bit more information. So you go on to the telemedicine, and maybe they tell you perhaps you need to actually have a face-to-face. So there's some companies that provide all of those. Okay, and they often talk about conflict at all kinds of levels. Channel conflict is when one member perceives that another member is impeding their goals. That someone is stepping into their territory or keeping them from achieving their goals. So you have the goal conflict, and then you have vertical conflict between different levels. And that's when hospitals establish urgent care doctors who aren't really part of their medical staff. They've got a contract with someone that sees patients on urgent care. Well, maybe those urgent care people that have contracts with the hospital see the hospital is taking away their patients. So that is when you have conflict between the different levels, the level that's close to the patient and the level that's one step up, the hospital. And then they have horizontal conflict, which happens when you have conflicts between people at the same level. And this would be when family practitioners become multi-specialty clinics. And so they have conflict between whose territory is whose territory. So there's always conflicts no matter where you're at. You need to look at, how to best alleviate those conflicts. If you have goal conflicts, again, it's between channel members with different understandings of what the objectives are. Domain conflict is when parties understand their responsibilities differently. They think that one thing is their responsibility and somebody else thinks something else is. And then you have perception conflicts, and that's when people read the market differently, when they think the market needs something that it really doesn't, or vice versa. And the actions as a result of it may vary between people within the same channels. Okay. Channel leadership, the one with the money and the one with the power is one that usually gets to have the say-so. And that's really basically what it boils down to. The leader in the channels is going to be the one with the most power. And that power can be derived from selling the most. It can be derived from being the most popular. It can be derived because you have you sell so many more products of something. If you're like, for instance, Best Buy, they're able to get products at a cheaper price because they have such volume involved. It can be someone that has a stronger image. For instance, if we're looking at clinics, Maybe if Mayo Clinic is in with a lot of other smaller, not as well-known clinics, they're going to be more powerful in the channel. So channel leadership is always dictated by reputation, by power, by money, by amount of people served. So channel leadership is not something that's voted on. It happens because of your position in the channel. And again, sources of power can be coercive, a negative source of power, which is when maybe hospitals will reduce the privileges of some community doctors in order to bully them basically into directing their referrals to that hospital. So if they don't do it, then they start reducing the power that the doctors have in that particular hospital. It can be economic resources, which is, for instance, somewhere, let's look, I've told y'all, I always use cars because I love vehicles. So I always use cars as an example, GM, Ford, Chrysler, whatever. I'm personally a Ford person, but let's say that Ford decides that needs certain auto parts, and maybe there's a limited number, but Ford is able to force the auto parts places to sell to them first, because otherwise they'll take their business elsewhere. So they have the money, the economic money, to be able to force it. And the same thing can happen when you have large medical groups forcing smaller ones out of business, because they can provide more, they can offer services at a lower rate. There's a lot of things they can do. So economically is another way that you can gain power, leadership power. And then there's the reward basis. And that's usually when, for instance, with insurance companies, they will pay for performance. Maybe they'll give hospital bonuses for performing less tests, maybe, there's all kinds of rewards that they do to keep costs down. The referent is the name or the reputation of the organization. You refer them back to them. That's how they have that source of power. And then expertise, and that's just that they're a recognized source of expertise. They're known worldwide or nationwide or citywide or whatever it happens to be for the expertise that they have in a particular area. Okay, it is 9 o'clock. Let me stop sharing for a minute. Okay, are we good? This is stuff right out of the book, and I tried to give you some examples that would help you remember. Basically, when you're looking at distribution, again, you're looking at what it's going to take to get a service or a product from the producer to the end user, to the ultimate consumer. In the case of the healthcare, it's what it's going to take to get it from the doctor or the hospital, where it happens to be, to the patient. And if you boil it down to that, it's really pretty simple. What do you have to go through? And there's a lot of theories behind it. And the book gives you examples both in the medical field and in the real world. I believe they do that because they think that maybe it touches home better when you look at it in the real world. If I talk to you about Best Buy, I'm sure that everybody in here has been in Best Buy at least one time in their life, And so, because it's kind of our go-to, maybe you don't actually buy there, but you go and look at it, maybe you'll go find a better deal somewhere else. But whatever it is, people know what Best Buy is. And Best Buy has got buying power. They're able to offer products sometimes at a lower price, sometimes not, because of their buying power, and because of their reputation, because they have the Geek Squad, who you can get a warranty with what you buy. So, you're not going to have to deal with, being on the phone for hours and hours and hours waiting to get help if you buy, somewhere else, and maybe not ever getting that help. So when we're looking at distribution, just think about it as, how are we going to get that product there? How do you get Advil? Well, you probably go to Target or Walmart or, wherever you happen to be, maybe the dollar store, wherever you happen to be at, and it's there on the shelf waiting for you. But that that Advil went through a lot of process before it got to you. There were a lot of intermediaries, and maybe even not, like in some cases, the capsule that is produced one place, the medicine's produced somewhere else, and then they're all put together, it's still a third place. And from there, it goes to probably a wholesaler who gets a pretty good deal on it, or better pricing. And then the wholesaler doesn't necessarily directly deliver it to the target where you're going to get it. Then it's probably going to go to a distributor. And that may be, Target May is their own distributor, and they get it from the wholesaler, and then they distribute it to the individual stores. So you have a lot of intermediaries in between. And most of the time, it's necessary to have those intermediaries there. Otherwise, it would just be mass havoc. There are some businesses that go direct to consumer. For instance, I can think of a lot of these vitamins that you see advertised on TV. Those go direct to consumer. That guy that advertises the mattresses and the pillows, I can't think of what his name is. He's direct to consumer for the most part. Occasionally, he shows up in Bed Bath & Beyond or somewhere, but for the most part, direct to consumer. So distribution, basically, that's all it is how are we going to get that service and that product to the ultimate user? Okay, do we have any questions? Okay, well, Diana, got a question?
No, I was going to say no questions.
Oh, okay, well, thank you. I'm glad. I like it when somebody at least answers me. Usually, Michael, you're not saying much today. Oh, I've lost Michael. Okay, so anyway, what I'd like to do now is give y'all, we've got about, if y'all don't have any questions about your proposal, I will push the due date to Sunday, and I'm going to put y'all into your groups for the rest of the time. If y'all don't need to be there, that's fine, but go in there and touch base with each other for at least 5 minutes, and then after that, you can go. Remember, I'm always available. If you have any questions that I didn't cover in the chapter, you can always call me or text me. Also, sometimes maybe I can say it a different way that'll help you understand it better. Also, if you have any questions on a proposal, I am available for you to just, hit me up. If I don't answer right away, send another text, because sometimes I forget the thing on silent. So, but I'm always happy to help. Okay, so I'm going to send y'all to your groups then.
I have a question. For the business proposal, so on Sunday, all we're submitting is that Word doc with all of our sections, right? Answering
and the flow chart.
And the flow chart?
Mm-hmm. And the flow chart is what the patient goes through from the time they contact to the time they leave.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay, thank you.
And be sure you have your references in there also.
Okay.
All right. Okay, breakout rooms. I'm going to let y'all self-select. And then I'll push y'all in the ones that don't get the opportunity to self-select. What's going on here? Something happened here. All right. Well, something is not working right here. Let's see. Breakout rooms. I've only got one. I wonder why. What's going on with this? All right. Let's try something different here. Okay, there we go. Now y'all can self-select.
For the references, are we able to do like any web pages?
Yes.
Okay.
Except Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any web pages, any journals, anything that is valuable. Anything that is like WebMD or anything that has some sort of my mind has gone blank today. Nothing, no kind of self-publishing stuff.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Professor, can I be pushed into my group?
Yes, you can. Which one, Karen?
It's group 3.
Okay. All right. Diana, which group?
I think group 5. I can join. 1 second.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, Janice, what group are you in? Okay, Kelly? Sophie, what group are you in? Oh, I'm missing people.
Oh, I'm in group 3.
I think I'm in 1, Professor. Sorry.
Okay, Sophie, you're in 1. Oops,
I'm in
wait a minute.
3. Kelly.
Okay, Kelly. Somehow I got y'all hooked together. Sophie, you're in 1. Okay, and Janet? Hmm.
Hi, Professor.
Hey, Diana, what's up?
I had a question. So I'm gonna be due soon with because I'm pregnant.
Uh-huh.
I'm kind of like getting a little nervous for the finals and stuff.
I'll work with you.
Okay. I don't know, like what should I do? Like, would I have to take it early or
No, well, when are you due?
May 16?
May 15th. Okay. If you want to take it early, you can.
Okay.
If you don't want to take it early, I can give you an incomplete.
Okay.
I don't know if you want an incomplete. I mean, that just leaves that hanging over your head with a newborn.
Yeah. For the overall class or?
Yeah, for the overall class.
Oh, okay. How does that work?
Well, what happens is that I submit everything that you've done so far, and then a list of things you haven't done, and then you have a certain amount of time to complete everything. I don't usually recommend it except in extreme circumstances, because then you have that, plus you have your current stuff, plus you have a newborn, but if it happens, like if the baby's, boy, you timed it, didn't you?
I know. I'm just like, why? I'm like freaking out. Like all my classes have like group projects. I'm like, oh my God, it's getting like down to the clock. I'm like, oh, so.
Is this your first?
Yes.
Yeah. So I would say, let's kind of play by ear, but whatever happens, don't stress out over this class, because I'll work with you.
Okay.
So if you want to, turn it in, if you want to take the exams early, you can. If you don't, if you can't, then okay. But the exams are going to be out. You're the 15th. Oh, I don't know what exams might be that week, right?
Yeah, it's the 12th, I think.
Oh, okay. So
I'm hoping the doctor said like usually with your first year late, so hopefully it's a little after that week. But yeah, you never know,
You don't know, you really don't, and that's certainly nothing you can control.
Yeah.
So my recommendation would be to try to get everything done, as best you can, early.
Okay.
And if you want to take the the final early, you can certainly take it early.
Okay.
So
once I get the incomplete, does that mean I can take the final like a little later?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So and I don't think grades, I can't remember when grades are due, but I could give you an incomplete and then like give you like 2 or 3 weeks or something to take it.
Okay.
We can look at it and see how you're feeling, and and because I know it's the first few weeks is tough with a newborn too.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, if you do have to do it, then we'll figure something out.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye. Carlo, you got a question?
I got a question. Yeah, for the proposal, for the location, do we need to like look for a specific like
Yes.
rental space?
Yes.
Okay.
Now,
Okay.
if you remember, we talked about in class, you have to find a real one. You can go on Zillow or you can go on
Okay.
real, okay?
Yeah, I found some, but I just want to make sure before I look for other spaces.
Yeah, if it happens to be that it's already being rented or something, that's okay, you know. But as long as
Okay.
you find a real place and you can, you know, do
Yeah.
a floor plan of it and all that stuff, you're good.
Okay. All right. Oh, you said you have a Raptor?
I do.
You have the first gen or the second gen?
The first, I have the steel one,
Also, you have the V8.
2014. Yeah, the
You have the
V8
V8.
with
All right.
6.2. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Every time I step on the gas, I'm going to an Exxon station.
Are you gonna switch it for the Lightning?
No.
No,
You know,
really?
I drive it back and forth to Texas, and there are no electrical places. Like
Oh, yeah,
there's
yeah,
like
yeah.
200 miles in West Texas that aren't even gas stations, much less electrical outlets. It would take me a month to get to Texas.
I feel bad for you with the gas prices right now.
Yeah, and it uses premium on top of that.
Ugh.
No, it's unbelievable. But I love my truck.
Oh, I would love that too if I have a Raptor. Yeah.
Yeah, I love my truck. So, you know, I just pay it and keep going.
All right, Professor. Nice talking to you.
Good talking to you, Carlo.
Bye.
Have a great day, Professor.
You too, Christine.